Please pray with me. Lord, take me where you want me to go. Let me meet who you want me to meet. Tell me what you want me to say, and please keep me out of your way. Amen. In the last few weeks, our readings have centered around John the Baptist and his role in the life of Jesus. And today is no different. We have been hearing from the Gospel of Luke, but now we get to hear from a different source, from the Gospel of John. And I'd like to share just a couple of bits about the origins of John's Gospel. First, it's not to be confused with John the Baptist, for the Gospel is not named for him. It has been attributed over time to one of the original disciples, John, the son of Zebedee. The Gospel, however, never identifies itself as to who wrote it. Scholars consider it anonymous like the other three Gospels. It's not really important, though, to know who wrote it. And why is that, you might ask? Because we like facts and figures. We like to nail things down. Instead of being the work of one individual author, it is seen as representing the work of the early Christian community. I stress this because the New Testament is not an individualistic document, but the church's book, written, preserved, translated, and interpreted within an entire community of faith early in its beginnings. And the Gospel of John came along to offer us a theological interpretation. John is unique in that sense. John tells us the why of the ministry of Jesus Christ. The Gospel of John was likely written in the town of Ephesus, which is in modern-day Turkey, and contains some of the best preserved Christian ruins anywhere in antiquity. The main purpose for John seems to be interpretation. By the time John was written, the majority of followers were now Gentiles, no longer born Jewish. They didn't have a Jewish history that followers reading the earlier three Gospels would have had. For me, this makes John so important today. We too attempt to interpret a faith conceived in biblical and Jewish terms in a modern secularized world. The Gospel of John provides a biblical model for the mission of the church in every generation to interpret its faith afresh. Every single generation can look to John anew. John reflects the situation of a Christian community sometime later, at the time when the parting of the ways for the Jews and the new Christians had become crystal clear and oh so painful. We can understand that painful parting between those Christians and those Jews of old when we look at the acrimonious tearing apart between the conservative interpreters of the Bible and those who followed the critical thinking method when it came first to the ordination of women in the 70s and 80s, and then to the ordination of gays and lesbians within our own denomination in the last 15 years. It is important to note that it is from John's Gospel that we get the details that let us know that Christ's ministry on earth lasted for 3 years. For you see, the other three Gospels only indicate that it lasted but one. And here we have John the Baptist, who very much had his own disciples, willing to die for their leader. And there was so much confusion around John. People, you see, were thirsty for a Messiah. They were living in an oppressed land, occupied by the Romans, desperate for hope for their future. So what did they look to? They looked to their Bible. For us, the Old Testament, to the words of the prophets that promised one day that a Messiah would come and relieve them of their oppression. And they felt like now was the time. John was the man. But John had no problem whatsoever letting people know that someone else greater than he was coming. John wasn't the light, but he reflected the light, and he led people to Jesus. Therein lies, in that statement, what I think has been the theme of these readings over the past few weeks. John wasn't the light, but he reflected the light and pointed people towards Jesus. I'll come back to that theme in a moment. There's a lot of language around the word in today's gospel reading. The Greek word for word is logos, and it has literally a dozen meanings, starting with speech, discourse, language, thought, reason, message, account, document, and even book, to name but a few. Logos was a term used by theologians and philosophers, both Greek and Hebrew. In Hebrew, the word was an agent for creation, the source of God's message to his people through the prophets. In Greek philosophy, the word was the divine essence that held all things together. God's ideal pattern for creation. I love that. You see it in the cosmos. You see it in DNA. You see it in the shape of a nautilus shell. God's ideal pattern for creation. The essence, you see, that holds all things together. In Greek terms, it's the divine essence that held all things together. God's ideal pattern for creation. And John's description also shows clearly that he is speaking of Jesus as a human being, but at the same time as the creator of the universe, that essence that holds all things together. Jesus, of course, is the ultimate revelation of God, the living picture, if you will, of God's holiness. And sending Jesus to earth, God was revealing something new about himself to each of us. And John, good old John, is trying so hard to interpret for us the history of the other three Gospels by telling us what Jesus' life means. And in the coming weeks, we'll have so many opportunities to explore this more. But in the meantime, I want to come back to that theme. I want you to remember what I said about John the Baptist's role in Jesus' life, to reflect the light of Jesus and to point others to him. And if you really think about that, and what the Gospel of John is saying to this generation, you have to ask yourself the question, isn't that my role as well? John the Baptist points us to Jesus. Shouldn't each of us be doing that for the people we love in our lives? Amen.